In this Baldur's Gate 3 video, I'll be showing you how to play Gale in Baldur's Gate 3 if you want to make him into a wizard who can handle any situation thrown at him. Wizards have the flexibility to change spells when things aren't working for them, and they can also learn spells from scrolls, so they have an advantage over sorcerers in some ways. In this Gale build guide, I'll cover ability scores, class features, equipment, and I'll provide tips on how to get the most out of Gale when played this way. Being a wizard, Gale has a large selection of spells he can learn and allows him to have the right spell for the situation. The reason this is an elementalist build is because he can swap spells when needed for the right damage type to avoid resistances and immunities, making him more effective than one or two elemental casters would be some of the time. The general strategy with this build is to build up reverberation or radiating orb stacks on enemies with Gale's AoE spells so that enemies take more damage and hit your party less often. Additionally, I've added a way for Gale to gain arcane acuity easily, which makes his spells more difficult to save against, which makes him particularly deadly in combat. I decided not to multi-class Gale for this build, giving him the most possible spells as quickly as you can, and the Evocation school has some nice benefits at levels 2 and 10. However, you could actually multi-class Gale with a fighter for 2 levels to pick up Action Surge if you wanted to, but I don't think it's necessary for this build. Since Gale begins Baldur's Gate 3 as a wizard, his ability scores are in line with what a typical wizard might have. However, you will want to respec him eventually to get the most out of him, otherwise he will not be optimized for much of the game. You can see that we've evened out many of his abilities to provide more benefit. I've set Constitution to 14 here because we don't really use many concentration spells, and Gale does not tend to get hit much with this build. The extra dexterity allows him to go sooner in combat by increasing his initiative, and gives him an additional armor class to help protect him from being hit. Gale has proficiency in Arcana and History from his background, so you cannot change these. However, he is an intelligence-based class, so these are actually good for him to have. I suggest taking Investigation, Nature, and Religion to round out his skills, giving him proficiency in all 5 intelligence skills. It's not likely if you're playing with Gale that you're using another intelligence-based character, so this is great. I like to keep my companions at least the class they begin the game with, since it feels like that's how Larian intended them to be played, and it's no exception with Gale. Gale begins the game as a wizard, but he does not yet have a school of wizardry, and here I've selected Evocation. This is an extremely new player-friendly school that boosts Evocation spell damage, and allows you to fling hostile Evocation AoEs into friendlies, including Gale, without damaging them. At level 1 of Wizard, Gale will gain his first spells and cantrips. I really like a mix of offensive cantrips like Firebolt, Ray of Frost, and Shocking Grasp, but eventually you'll want Acid Splash as well. This sets you up nicely with 3 different damage types and gives you a melee range spell in case enemies get close. For level 1 Wizard spells, I recommend the following. Mage Armor is a staple for increasing Gale's armor class throughout the game, and you only need to cast it once each long rest. Shield will protect him if he gets attacked in combat and can be a lifesaver. False Life is used to buff Gale with temporary HP before tough fight, but you won't use it all the time. Magic Missile cannot miss and does force damage, giving you yet another damage type, and Thunder Wave can knock things to their death or away from you and deals thunder damage, another damage type. Ice Knife does piercing damage and cold damage, and is an attack roll that targets armor class. The Arcane and Recovery class feature allows Gale to replenish a spell slot without resting, which can be a great way to keep him going without using valuable supplies. The higher level he gets in Wizard, the higher level spell slots he can recover. At level 2 of Wizard, Gale will get to select a School of Magic for his subclass. Evocation is what we're going with in order to pick up Sculpt spells, which prevents Gale's Evocation spells that hit in an area from damaging friendlies. This is a lot stronger than you would think and makes life playing Gale a lot easier, particularly if you're a new player. You can pick up Burning Hands here, as well as something like Chromatic Orb. Both are Evocation spells. At level 3 Wizard, Gale will gain access to level 2 Wizard spells and gain level 2 spell slots. He can also upcast level 1 Wizard spells using these slots for increased effect. Magic Missile, for example, generates another missile. Thunder Wave, Ice Knife, Chromatic Orb, and Burning Hands do more damage if upcast, and False Life gives you more temporary health. Shield and Mage Armor cannot be upcast, so try to avoid using higher level spell slots to cast them. For level 2 spells, I recommend the following. Blur is probably going to be the only concentration spell you use with this build, and that's because it makes enemies have disadvantage when they attack you. This helps make them miss, which prevents the need for a concentration saving throw a lot of the time, but not all. Misty Step is used for positioning and is a bonus action, so you can use it and still cast another spell on the same turn. Scorching Ray is excellent at hitting many targets, but also triggers Hat of Fire Acuity for each beam that connects, drastically increasing the chance for your spells to deal full damage and not be saved against. Melf's Acid Arrow is a good acid damage spell, giving you a reliable acid damage type. At level 4 Wizard, Gale will get to select another Wizard cantrip, and I recommend taking Acid Splash here if you didn't take it earlier. You'll also get to select Gale's first feat, and I highly recommend taking Alert here. This will improve his initiative significantly, allowing him to go earlier in combat. His big damage spells later on can change the outcome of a combat very often, so by going sooner, he has a chance to prevent damage to his team. At level 5 of Wizard, Gale's cantrip damage will increase, allowing him to do more damage with them by about double. This helps somewhat keep him up with martial classes, though they can usually attack twice at this level of the game. He will also gain access to level 3 Wizard spells and spell slots, and I recommend the following spells. Fireball and Lightning Bolt both hit for damage in large areas, dealing damage even if enemies save, and both are evocation spells. Counterspell can be used as a reaction to shut down hostile spells if you need to use it. At level 6 of Evocation Wizard, Gale will gain Potent Cantrip. This allows Acid Splash and Poison Spray, if you have it, to deal at minimum half damage even if the target saves against them. Gale won't take advantage of this much, but it's still good to have. At level 7 of Wizard, Gale will gain access to level 4 Wizard spells and spell slots, and I recommend the following spells. Ice Storm is a huge AoE that creates an icy surface that enemies can slip on for 2 turns and does cold and bludgeoning damage. Gale will use this one because of its large size quite often, and the fact it applies damage twice allows him to take advantage of gear that adds damage when spells deal damage too. Blight is good for a large necrotic damage AoE when you need it. Conjure Minor Elemental can be used to get another body or 2 onto the battlefield, and doesn't require concentration, which we are trying to avoid. At level 8 of Wizard, Gale will gain his second feat, and I highly recommend taking Ability Improvement and increasing Intelligence. You want his spells to connect more often, so this helps a lot. Additionally, he will be able to prepare an additional spell, and once he's level 10, that intelligence will help contribute to spell damage. At level 9 of Wizard, Gale will learn level 5 Wizard spells and spell slots, and I recommend the following spells. Cone of Cold is a high damage cold spell that hits in a cone in front of you. Better for smaller groups than Ice Storm, but we'll probably use it less often. Conjure Elemental is a spell that helps get another body onto the battlefield, one that can be used in conjunction with minor elementals, and again, doesn't require concentration. At level 10 of Evocation Wizard, Gale can select another Wizard cantrip, and I recommend either Bone Chill or Poison Spray. His cantrips also increase in damage once again, making them even more effective. He will also gain the Empowered Evocation passive feature that will automatically add his intelligence modifier to the damage of all evocation spells he casts, including cantrips. This will further boost the damage of these spells and is particularly good on evocation spells that hit multiple times, like Magic Missile, Scorching Ray, Ice Knife, and Ice Storm. At level 11 of Wizard, Gale will gain access to level 6 Wizard spells and 1 level 6 spell slot. I recommend the following spells. Odaluk's Freezing Sphere and Chain Lightning are both high damage evocation spells, so Gale will make great use of them and safely. Sunbeam gives Gale a good radiant option, and even though it does use concentration, you won't need it very often. Disintegration is a high damage single target force damage spell for those times when you need that damage type. At level 12 of Wizard, Gale will gain his final feat, and I suggest taking Ability Improvement once again to get his intelligence to 20. This will allow him even more success with casting spells and further improve his damage. When it comes to equipment, as a human wizard, Gale will only have access to clothing, light armor, and shields. For armor, you're really looking for anything that increases his spell difficulty class, like the Protecty Sparks Wall. This one is particularly good as it provides him with +1 to armor class and saving throws when he has lightning charges, and can also be used with mage armor. For weapon, I tried a lot of different quarterstaffs with this build, and any with an increase to spell difficulty class was good to have, as these make his spells more difficult to save against. However, we have other ways to make his spells more effective, so I opted for a staff that boosts his damage, and that was the Spell Sparkler. This staff gives him lightning charges when he casts spells, and this adds damage to the spells he casts. It's not a ton of damage, but it adds up over time. It can also help to trigger reverberation when using Gloves of Belligerent Skies, which reduces the saving throws of enemies. For shield, I have Kethric's Shield for this build, as it increases Gale's spell difficulty class even further, making his spells even harder to save against, while also providing Gale with some extra armor class. For helmet, I like Hat of Fire Acuity. This allows you to boost Gale's spell difficulty class by up to +7 by simply casting Scorching Ray on an enemy. This will make it much harder for enemies to save against subsequent spells, though he will lose a stack of Arcane Acuity every turn. For Cloak, I like Cloak of Protection. This is good on any character, but the extra armor class is great for him since he's really not wearing any on his chest slot. The extra +1 to saving throws is also nice. For gloves, he'll be either using Luminous Gloves or Gloves of Belligerent Skies. Luminous Gloves makes it so that when Gale deals radiant damage, the target gains a stack of Radiating Orb, reducing their hit chance by 1 for each stack. This maxes out at +7, which can make enemies really struggle to hit your party. Gloves of Belligerent Skies makes it so whenever Gale deals thunder, lightning, or radiant damage, enemies gain stacks of reverberation. Reverberation penalizes saving throws to Constitution, Strength, and Dexterity by -1 for each stack, up to 7. This allows Gale to seriously debuff enemies so that they are far less likely to save against his deadly AoEs. If you have a more martial-focused party, use Luminous Gloves. If you have a more caster-focused party, use Gloves of Belligerent Skies. For Necklace, I recommend Necklace of Elemental Augmentation. This allows Gale to add his Intelligence modifier to his cantrip damage, and this stacks with Empowered Evocation, so his cantrips will hit harder. For rings, I like Coruscation Ring and Callous Glow Ring. Coruscation Ring makes it so when Gale deals spell damage while illuminated by a light source, he adds 2 stacks of Radiating Orb to the target. This happens quite often, and as enemies get Radiating Orb, they will start to become light sources themselves, so this gets easier and easier to trigger over time in combat. Callous Glow Ring makes it so Gale adds 2 radiant damage to his damage when hitting enemies that are illuminated. Radiating Orb illuminates them, and this applies to each source of damage. So if you hit with Magic Missile, for instance, it would do 2 additional radiant damage for each missile, would then also apply 2 Radiating Orb stacks for each missile you hit with. This turns Gale not only into a nuker, but also a debuffer simultaneously, which helps prevent party damage. Final tips. Make sure that you buff Gale with Mage Armor after every long rest if you're not using light armor on him. This will help increase his armor class by +3, which is significant. Don't be afraid to use False Life before tough fights and upcast it with higher level slots so that Gale is protected from a good chunk of damage. You can replenish the slot with Arcane Recovery, which you will likely not want to use during combat anyway since it consumes an action to do so. Blur is Gale's way of avoiding most direct attacks, so you want to either cast this before combat if it's predictable, or decide when during combat would be a good time. A lot of times you're better off using an AoE first, but it really depends on the fight. Use Misty Step to reposition Gale if needed. Sometimes he can reach more enemies if he teleports, or maybe he's surrounded and you need to get him the hell out of there. It's a bonus action, so he can still cast and use it on the same turn, and moving with it does not trigger attacks of opportunity. So this wraps up our Gale build guide. I know a lot of people have been struggling to really use Gale in their party. I think it's because the way spell slots and resting works in this game. But I hope I've showed you some good equipment that can really augment the way a lot of people are playing Gale naturally anyway, that will also debuff enemies, so he's a lot stronger just by doing what a lot of people would do. Stay tuned for more BG3 content. We do have a Lysel build coming, as well as some main character builds.